Mr. Rodgers, there used to be a time when collectors of obscure Rodgers and Hart songs could feel superior in knowing some that other collectors hadn't struck upon yet. But in these days, with the LP album and its voracious appetite, this is getting to be a dying art. Do you find people still approaching you and saying, I know a song that you've probably forgotten?
Oh, yes, that happens very frequently, and it's always very heartening, very gratifying, because it indicates an interest.
But it's getting harder and harder to be a Rodgers and Hart snob these days. But I do know a few which I'd like you to touch upon. I'd like to sort of challenge you if you can remember them. At the beginning, let's go back to 1920 and the first show, Poor Little Ritz Girl. In that, there was a song called Mary, Queen of Scots. Now, I've never heard it, and I'm rather curious to hear it.
Well, it was a comedy song, and was sung by a wonderful, wonderful comedian named Lulu McConnell. And it was fast. It was a 2/4 time, as comedy songs pretty generally were in those days. I can show you a little of how it goes if I can remember it. No, that's wrong. See, that's pretty awful.
Only you can say that and get away with it. There's a song I like very much in The Boys from Syracuse, and it's similar in tempo to that. It's a song, and the lyrics are, come with me where the rent is free and the landlord never comes near you. Come with me to a house of rest where the best of fellows can cheer you. Come with me to jail.
Well, you're much better at the words than I am. I'm sure you're better at the music, too. It started like this. Something like that.
And then there's a very pretty love song in The Babes in Arms, and it has the one-word title, Imagine.
Well, that's a different kind of song entirely. Yeah.
Going back to one of your first shows, the first big successful shows, 1926, I think, Dearest Enemy, which was about the American Revolution.
Yeah.
Didn't I see it revised on television a few years ago?
Yes, I think they did.
Well, that's where I saw it, not in 1926.
No.
And there was a rather amusing song in that with a very English title called Cheerio, Little Mother of Mine.
Yeah, Cheerio was a march in the conventional 6/8 time.
Wasn't it sung by the commanding officer of British forces, General, was it Burgoyne?
I think it was, but I'm not sure. Anyway, it was sung by the commanding officer and all his men.
Now, the show I Married an Angel. Now, I saw this only in the motion picture version, not the Broadway show, and in that, Nelson Eddy sang a song called I'll Tell the Man in the Street and Everyone I Meet that You and I are sweethearts.
Yes. Walter Schlazak sang that in the stage piece. This way. On the same way.
And the song I like very much, and I know it only from a recording, is Can't You Do a Friend a Favor?
That was the revival in 1943 of Connecticut Yankee.
A very pretty melody.
Well, it wasn't in the original. It was written for the revival. Let's see. I have to try and remember these. snob is.
Now, here's a really obscure one. I wonder if you can remember a song you did in 1934 for a motion picture called Nana, the Emile Zola story, in which Anna Sten played the part of Nana, and you wrote one song for that, and it was called That's Love.
Yes, and it was in the minor mode, and we were borrowed by Sam Goldwyn from Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer to write the song. I barely remember it. I don't think I liked it very much either.
Have you any idea how many songs you've written?
I was asked this just last week, and I tried to work it out on a mathematical basis. If you've done 40-odd scores, which I think I've done, and you average 15 songs to a score, you'd be well over 600 songs for things that we used. Then if you added to that the innumerable songs you wrote and then tore up that never got either into rehearsal or to Broadway, you'd have to go over 1,000 somewhere in there.
And you have difficulty recalling some of the melodies.
Oh, yes, surely. The great many of them, all of them that we used, of course, were on paper and they're available. But the ones that we destroyed, I don't think we know too much about today.
Now, let's see how well you can recall my favorite Rodgers and Hart song, which is called Why Can't I?
Oh, I can recall that all right. That was Spring Is Here.
I've met people who think that the Rodgers of Rodgers Hart is a different man from the Rodgers of Rodgers Hammerstein. Have you ever come across that?
Oh, yes, many times, and I've asked myself about it. And I think he is different in certain respects. One thing, he's a good deal older. Another is the natural result of the difference between Hart and Hammerstein.
Well, what kind of a man was Hart?
Well, just about as varied a personality as you can possibly imagine. He was difficult in many ways, but never meant to be difficult. He was a sweet man. He was a very good man. He was a very kind man.
From what I can gather about him, he was a very short, not very good-looking man.
No, that's not true. He was short. He's a little bit of a fella. But if you took a good look at his face and tried to dissociate his face from his body, you would have found an extraordinarily handsome one.
Was he anything of a Don Juan by nature, by inclination?
No. He loved people. But he had no extraordinary interest in women. And he used to go out with them, but he never married. And I don't think this was his primary drive in life.
Or so many of his lyrics have a bittersweet quality, so much unrequited love. For instance, this song, Why Can't I? This has some peculiarly poignant lines. For instance, everybody has someone, why can't I? Creeping to bed alone, resting my head alone, only the pillow nearby. Only my book in bed knows how I look in bed. Nobody hears when I cry. Everybody has someone, why can't I? Now, how much of Larry Hart himself is in those lines?
I think probably none. To begin with, this song was written for two girls to sing to each other. These were two girls who wanted very badly to be in love and weren't. Now, you could, through some Freudian piece of mechanics, turn this into an autobiographical statement, but I think it'd be reaching for it. I don't think this is what he meant. I don't think he was talking about himself. As a matter of fact, the way we've always written Larry and I and Oscar and I, has been out of situations in plays rather than trying to express our own particular philosophies.
It would seem that Hammerstein puts a lot of his own personal philosophy into his lyrics, more so than Larry Hart.
Well, I think the lyrics per se are more philosophical. I think this is the way Larry was not, and the way Oscar is. Then, too, I think it's impossible not to express the way you feel in your work. I think this is true of painters. I think it's even true of architects. I think you express your own personality in your own medium. And I've never known of anybody who was successful in this medium who didn't do that. You can't get away from it. But I don't think that this necessarily has to be a platform for what you believe, let us say.
In the case of Larry Hart, he is respected so much in this profession as being a genius or near genius, a man with a peculiar ability for words, internal rhymes, matching phrases.
I think he was a tremendously skilled man. He was a brilliant man with words. He knew more about rhyming than almost anybody I've ever known, and he loved to do it. This is a very good form of showing off, because he could rhyme things that nobody else would dare touch, and it created tremendous attention for him.
Would you deny this bittersweet quality in some of the work?
No, I don't deny it. I think it's there.
There was an unhappy streak in this man.
Oh, yes, he was very unhappy.
And he died, in his mid-40s?
He was 47.
And this was almost a form of suicide. Did he not have a death wish?
I think he did. I think. I'm not a psychiatrist. I never said to him, would you like to die? And he never told me that he would. But I think he was a very unhappy man. And I think if he had had as much will to live as I have, for instance, he would never have allowed himself to get that sick to begin with.
In the last year of his life, your association with him would have become strained because of his health. Did you not break away from him before he died?
Oh, yes. He couldn't work. And at that time, I was 40, with a wife whom I still have, and 2 children whom I still have, plus a mess of grandchildren. And I wasn't ready to quit. And I knew he had to, and I had to go on. And I did. And that was when I went to Oscar and asked him if he would like to work with me.
Hammerstein at that time was no stranger to you. You'd known him since college days.
Since before my college days. I knew him long before I went to college. My brother went to Columbia before I did. He's 4.5 years older, and Oscar is 7 years older. And the first time I ever met Oscar was when I was 13 years old, I think. Oscar swears that I wore short pants, and I swear I didn't.
Did he not write some songs with you during those student days at Columbia?
Yes, when I was a student, when I was a freshman at Columbia, he wrote a couple of lyrics which I set to music that were in the first college show that I did.
I wonder why there was so much difficulty in getting Oklahoma staged. I've heard the difficulty was that you were a new team, but you had known each other and worked together before.
Yes, but nobody took that very seriously. These were 2 amateur songs that we wrote together for a college show. And there was an almost superstitious feeling on part of the people in the business that anybody who had worked for 24 years with one man, as I had with Larry, simply couldn't hit it off with a brand new partner. So this sort of put superstitions to rest on, I hope, a permanent basis.
Superstition doesn't enter into your art very much.
Not a bit.
You're a businessman.
No, I'm not a businessman in any sense. I'm a very bad businessman. I don't do any business. I have people who do it for me. I don't hire anybody. I don't let anybody go. I don't talk money with anybody. See, it's a very comforting thing to be able to pay people to do that for you. I have a very good business manager in this office. I have a very good lawyer. I have an accountant. And at this moment, I can't tell you the salary of anybody who works for me.
But you do conduct your business along business-like lines. You're not the traditional bohemian songwriter.
Oh, I'm not a nut. But there's a vast difference between being what's known as a businessman with capital letters and being a fool. And I don't think I'm a businessman, nor, I must admit, do I think I'm a fool. I put my business in the hands of people who know how to handle it.
Your music is played so much, in so many ways. Does it bother you to hear songs murdered in raucous, discordant arrangements?
Yes, it does. I hate to hear them murdered. But this is a complicated question that you're asking in a very simple way. I don't mind variations, especially with older songs. If somebody wants to take a 20-year-old song and do his own version of it, I encourage it. I think this is one way of keeping the 20-year-old song alive. I think if it were possible, which it isn't, to force performers and orchestras to stick rigidly to the way the song was written, the song would be dead in 3 months. It becomes so tiresome, so monotonous. I don't like to be given bad musical grammar. I don't like it when it's what you call raucous. And I don't like it when it's in bad taste. And why should I? But variations don't bother me at all.
However, you don't allow this leeway in the performance of the Rodgers-Hammerstein shows. They are performed to the letter.
When we can possibly get them performed the way they were written, we do. Because we find from experience, some of it painful, that the best way to project these things and to get a response from a live audience is to do them the way they were done originally after we got finished correcting them ourselves.
With this enormous gift of melody that you have, why have you limited yourself entirely to the theater?
I think that the theater is my medium. I don't think that I have any business trying to write abstract music. I don't think I'm a symphonic composer. I think the field of opera is too restricted for me. And I can say everything I want to say inside the walls of a legitimate theater.
Olin Downs quoted you as saying, "We are not songwriters, we are people of the theater. We don't just write songs so that people will like them and sing them. We write songs to advance the plot."
That's true. You might have added one more clause to that sentence. You might have said, and we hope that people will like them.
You are concerned that people will like them. It's not...
Well, of course you are. You want people to like the songs. You want people to like everything you do. If you didn't, you wouldn't be human. And you'd like to walk along the street and hear some kid whistling a tune that you wrote. This is one of the most gratifying sensations in the world.
Now, with Hart, you followed the traditional Broadway habit of writing the music first. Hammerstein was used to this method, too, but when you collaborated, you switched.
Yes, and that was logical enough. Oscar is one of the few people in the entire world who has I'm talking about lyric writers, of course, who has a tremendous sense of construction. And without a tune, his lyrics are beautifully built. And he likes the latitude of being able to write first, without the constriction of a melody. On the other hand, I find that having the lyric, in addition to the situation in the play, is very helpful to me. It gives me an extra push into the solution of the problem of finding the tune.
Mr. Rodgers, from Poor Little Ritz Girl in 1920, The Sound of Music in 1960. That's 40 years of writing songs. Now, do you find it more difficult or easier to write music now than you did in previous times?
That's a very good question, and I'd like to be able to answer it with some degree of sense. I don't find it more difficult to write. I find it more difficult to find the time to write. It's just occurred to me that this is really the answer. The absolute writing is no more difficult. I know that with The Sound of Music, I had the time of my life. The stuff just rolled. But getting the time to sit down and concentrate is more difficult all the time. There are more committees, there are more commitments, there are more boards that you find yourself sitting on, and they're important. I'm on a couple of school boards that I wouldn't give up for anything. And this takes time. You have to go.
This is an aspect of your life which wouldn't occur to me or anybody else. We think of a songwriter as a man who sits at the piano all day and does nothing else.
Well, I wish you wouldn't think of me as a songwriter. Not that there's anything the matter with being a songwriter, but this just doesn't happen to be my job. My job is concerned with the theater in almost all its aspects, including the educational ones. And all these things take time.
It's been said about you that you can write melodies as easily as if it were in the same league as eating, drinking, and breathing. Now, is it really that easy for you?
You could say that it was as easy as eating, for instance. If you started with the beginning of eating, which would be raising the cattle that provided the meat, or growing the vegetable or the fruit, and then the actual process of eating is quite simple, provided you have some teeth left, which I'm happy to tell you I have. The easy approach to this is to say, oh, look, Oscar handed him a lyric, and Oscar falls into this trap, too, in thinking about it. Handed him a lyric, and out came the tune in 5 minutes. Well, the tune didn't come out in 5 minutes. We had gone through months of discussion about the play. We knew a great deal about the situation in which the particular song occurred. We had reached a mutual decision as to the time signature so that it would fit in with the song before and the song after. All these things condition the actual composing. And you carry this around with you subconsciously and consciously very often for a great length of time. And finally, you reach the moment of composition, and it comes in a rush.
The execution is brief, but it's preceded by a long trial.
A tremendous period of trial and error and thought and discussion and decision. To say that you sit down and peel this stuff off is really doing the man, in my case, me, an injustice.
Now, you've written 11 musical plays, 9 for Broadway, 1 for Hollywood State Fair, and 1 for television, Cinderella. How do you react to the criticism that the last 5 have not matched the quality of the first half dozen?
You mean with Oscar?
Yes, the overall success.
I don't know. I'm not in a position to have an objective viewpoint about this. You see, at the time that you produce the play, you're sure it's the best thing you've ever done. If you didn't, you'd be out of the business. You'd be selling neckties someplace. So you're convinced that what you've done most recently is the best. And it takes time. It takes 3, 4, 5 years to realize the Pipe Dream wasn't very good. It takes 5 minutes to realize that The Sound of Music is. And you need time to acquire a perspective on this sort of thing. Then you have to try to make an estimate of the people who are criticizing you. You shouldn't. It's a waste of energy. You should forget about that and just go on with your work. But again, being human, you read what's said about you and you listen to what's said about you, and you're pleased by it or you resent it.
It seems to have become the fashion to greet each new Rodgers Hammerstein show with something like, it's wonderful, but it's not quite as great as Oklahoma or Carousel or King and I or South Pacific.
Well, you see, this is very interesting when you say you put the King and I in with these great big shows of ours, because when the King and I opened, they said exactly the same thing about the King and I. Said, this is a very nice show, it's okay, it's quite beautiful to look at, but it's no South Pacific, and it wasn't the South Pacific. It was never intended to be.
Yes.
It's a different show entirely, just as The Sound of Music is no King and I. It's a different kind of show. But it's a human failing, I think, to try to put things on a comparative basis. I think people feel safer that way.
Yeah, so what is failure to you would be success in a lesser league?
Oh, yes, I don't hear too much about Flower Drum Song, which is now about a year and 2 months old at the St. James Theater. This in anybody's league is a great big success. But when it opened, they said, this is no South Pacific. Well, it's no good a damn wrong either.
Mr. Rodgers, you've been conditioned to success for so long. Are you impervious to the feeling it gives you?
Never, never. There are certain elemental things that are always gratifying. Eating, a warm bath, making love, and having a successful show.